Hello everyone! Today we are jumping into the last official N5 lesson of, or N5 or beginner, depending on how you want to look at it. And today we are talking about de shou. And we're going to kind of dive into this and talk about it's just a single word that has one fundamental meaning, but a bunch of different usages. And we're going to talk about the different ways that we can deal with that. So if you'll give me just 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, you've probably seen this before. It's an extremely common word, and just a quick guess. You might already know. You might already know this, but just in case you don't, we have a small group today, so I hope someone tries to answer. When you see this word, does it remind you of any other words? Like when you see the word de shou, do you think, oh, it kind of looks like that other word that we use all the time? Not necessarily. Yes, that's what I was thinking of as like the actual spelling. Nay, I kind of see where the person's going with that, but yes, it looks really similar to des. Which, by the way, most people in most situations don't say desu; they say des. However, that is not a golden rule. You can't, or rather, it's not that you can just say des in any situation. You do hear desu in certain during certain times. I hear it sometimes in more formal speeches, and most importantly, or rather most commonly, on the phone. I honestly don't know why. I mean, there is a bit more formality when you're talking with someone on the phone because you're usually you might be talking to someone at a company, at a store, you're asking for help, and so you're going to be a bit more formal than usual. I almost have to wonder if it has to do with the quality of phone calls way back when they weren't quite as clear, and so you wanted to enunciate each syllable a bit more. This is just me kind of just thinking, why is this the case? But even now, I hear my wife, when she speaks, when I used to work at a school, every time someone picked up the phone, it wouldn't be, if they were saying their name, if I was speaking, I wouldn't say, Michael desu, I'd say Michael desu, and they hold on that su. But just an interesting thing. It might be so it's clear, although I feel like that's probably not needed now due to the quality of phone conversations compared to, say, 20 years ago, for those of you that were using the phone 20 years ago. Anyway, let's put that to the side. Anyway, yes, this is tied to des. And it kind of looks like the masho, if it's got that sho added to the end of it, but that's not quite what it means. So let's talk about what it actually functions as. And this is the core function that you have popping up in every single usage, which is uncertainty. And I don't necessarily mean uncertainty in a negative way. I just mean uncertainty in the way where you are stating something that is not 100%. What is 100%? A fact or reporting information. That is, you say, for example, I look outside today and fortunately it is sunny today over here. So I would say, 今日は晴れです. It is sunny. There's no doubt about that. I can look outside, I can see it. However, if whatever you're presenting, the information you're presenting is not 100%, but it's close to it, let's go with there's not an official number, but let's just go with the 60, 70, 80, 90%, kind of in that range. You're closer to believing it's true than not true. But you want to say, I think this is the case, but I'm not 100% sure. De shou is perfect for that. Because of that, you hear it translated in a huge range of ways. And someone earlier mentioned, oh, I think this is kind of like ne. And it can be translated that way, but you see it sometimes written as I think, even though the word think is not in the sentence at all. Probably, depending on the intonation and the context, it might be don't you think? You might be wondering about something, but it's all about where you're throwing out some information that's not 100%. That's what we want to hold on to here, because that's the core element. So let's jump into an example really quickly. The I think or I probably, where you are kind of stressing that you feel that this is probably going to happen, but you're not 100% sure. And we've got two sentences here. The first one's one that, we're already pretty common, or we're pretty familiar with. And this is where, 今日は雨です. Now, when could I say this? Describe the situation in which I could say this. When can I say 今日は雨です? When it's actively raining. I like that. I like that wording. I know what you're going for. It makes me think of the clouds are energetically throwing the rain out of the clouds. Get out there, rain. But yes, you are reporting a fact. And so you look outside and you say, oh, it's raining or it's rainy, depending on which one it happens to be. And, that's exactly what's going on. Now, the cool thing about deしょうis it's a drop-in replacement for des. It's a drop-in replacement for des. And so you don't need to change anything else. All we have to do is swap out that des for deしょうto go in and have a bit of uncertainty. So, 今日は雨でしょう? Where do you think you hear this? There's one example I'm thinking of in my head that depending on your daily rhythm, what you do each day, there's a good chance you will hear sentences like this every day. Where is it? Or when is it? Exactly, the weather forecast. If you listen to a weather forecast in Japan, they will use deしょうabout 6,000 times in a 30-second span. Because, they're busting out, they're talking about what's happening today in the afternoon, what's tomorrow, the rest of the week. And they have, information backing those predictions, but they're ultimately predictions. And so you see deしょうpop out right there. And I hear it more often, there than anywhere else. And so again, just to recap, if it's actively raining, it's throwing that rain out, then you're going to use that first one. And the person that just put out this message in the chat, that's a really good example. If you're looking out, this isn't the weather forecast, you're looking out and it's dark, there are rain clouds, and you're like, it's probably going to rain. Sure, you could say this. This would work. Now, these were noun examples. But while a noun often, has des following it in a sentence, there's a lot of different things that may or may not have des follow it that you can follow up with deしょう. And this is kind of cool. So, these first two, we've got adjectives in the first two sentences. And let's take a look at those real fast. So if you look at a pen, and the pen doesn't look particularly expensive, and you're thinking, this pen is probably cheap, then you could say this. このペンは安いでしょう? And, if we were stating, if you looked at the price and you said it was cheap, it would be 安いです, right? What about the second one? Second one, we're switching out the e adjective for a na adjective. But again, the same way that you could say 元気です or 暇です, we're saying, tomorrow, do you know that you're going to be free? It might be the case that you state emphatically, I am free tomorrow. And to the best of your knowledge, you will be free or available. And you could say, 明日は暇です. And that would be okay, that would be natural. However, if you're trying to hedge your bet a little bit, someone says, hey, so you could help me move tomorrow, right? Move houses? And you're like, I think I'll be free, but I might need to come up with an excuse to say I'm not free. And then you could use this. 明日は暇でしょう? To say you're probably free. And again, we're going to peg it somewhere in that 60 to 99% range. as to how likely that happens to be the case. So we're talking about uncertainty, but we're talking about positive uncertainty, as in closer to it being yes than it being no. Now, this last one is a bit different. This is kind of the first time we've seen something like this, that we have a verb ending the sentence and then we throw something else after it. And this works as well. Now, please note that if you say, I think I'm going to Japan, or not going, I think I'm going to go to Japan. 日本に行くでしょう. I'll probably go to Japan. With this, you're going to want to have the casual form. Like almost all situations, not all, but most situations where something's coming after the verb, you tend to have the casual or the shortened form prior to it. And so here, if you were to swap it out and say 日本に行きますでしょう, then it's unnatural. So you want to keep it on the, 行くでしょう. And in the same way, we've used positive words so far in the 安い、暇、行く. We could also do this. I'm going to type them out into the channel. We could use the negative forms. These would all be okay. でしょう is showing uncertainty about the statement that comes before it. There's no way to negate でしょう itself. Like there's no でしょうじゃない. What would that? I'm not uncertain about what I said. If you said that, you would just say it, straight as a fact to begin with. So there's nothing that you add after でしょう. You can't negate that. If you want to say something is probably not this, you will negate that statement. So that's whatever comes before でしょう. Now, before we continue on with the next one, I want to practice a little bit. But before we practice, just a quick little side note. Can anyone guess? Now, we've been talking about でしょう. And I don't think I've explicitly mentioned this, but you would consider this the polite form. Like, as I said, we replaced des with this. Des is considered a polite form, mas and des. And so でしょう is also a polite form. And it can be used in formal situations as well. However, what if you want to, make it a bit more casual? Does anyone know what the casual form of でしょう is? There's actually, believe it or not, 3. There's 3 of them. I might be getting a bit, technical with my separation into 3, but I can think of 3 different ways to make this more casual, or make it casual. Any ideas? だろ is one of them. Yes. だろ would be, in my head, 2 steps down. So here's what I'm thinking. でしょう is the polite form. There's something in between these 2, and then there's だろ and then there's one more. Now I'll give you a hint. The second one is a form of でしょう. See if you can tinker with that word and see if you can change it up a little bit. Same with the last one. The last one is a form of だろ I'll give you one more hint. Think about casual. What tends to happen with casual words in Japanese? They get what? What happens with words or structures in Japanese? The more casual you get, something tends to happen. It's a very common pattern. Shortened, exactly. They tend to get shortened. Sentences get shorter. You drop out particles. You drop this out, you don't say this. How can we shorten these 2 words? Not quite. Think a bit more simply. There's no changing that needs to be done. There just needs to be some chopping. Chop, chop. What can we chop? What can we chop off? De is a little too short. That would be nice. but it's a little too short. Desh, dewa. I think you're all trying to shorten it a bit too much. So I'm going to jump in and give you the answer. Here they are. Desho and daro. That's it. You just drop the u off of the end. So it's just one syllable. And you think, that's nothing. But, it adds a bit of casualness. So it shortens it just a bit. So desho, and daro. And you notice that I had a rising intonation when I said desho and daro. And you'll see why. Because it's more, these shortened forms, I feel they're more common in a slightly different usage, which we're about to get to. Now, before we continue on, let's practice this a little bit. So remember, this is for giving a statement and not saying, I have this statement, but it's not 100%. So maybe something about the future, maybe something about later today, about tomorrow, about next week. It could be about something unrelated to you, the weather, prices, the world. It could be your plans. I think I'll do this tomorrow or whatever. So I'll give you an example. So I think I'm going to go shopping today. I need to get some new dog food for our little puppy, but I'm not 100%. It's an aspiration. Like, I'd like to go shopping if I can find some time. So 今日は買い物するでしょう? What about you? What's something that you're pretty sure about, but you're not 100%? And those of you watching the stream, you cannot see this, but there are people trying, they're typing. So we're just giving them a minute to type out some answers. And for those of you that are feeling like, oh, maybe I should, but I'm not sure if I'll get it right, who cares? Getting it wrong is the best way to ultimately getting something right. So I strongly recommend you give it a shot. And making mistakes will help reinforce the correct, or if it's not correct, then the better way of saying it. So one person's talking about studying, I'm guessing Japan and not Japanese. Now, benkyo, that's an action. So you want that verb in there before desho. Benkyo suru desho. So you can put the verb, can and should put the verb before. So it actually goes with both people that you just happen to do the same thing, or almost the same thing. So benkyo does represent an activity, like benkyo is studying, but when using desho, you would want to put the suru in there. As to why, so this is actually a really good point. I'm going to take the person that just responded, I'm going to put their sentence, and I'm going to write. So we've got two sentences here that look almost exactly the same. So what's the difference? I'm going to start with the bottom one because that's similar to what's on the screen. If you say Nihongo no benkyou suru desho, it's like I'll probably study Japanese. There's an action, so you're talking about the probability of that action happening. However, the top one, Nihongo no benkyou desho, if it's just a noun, remember, what is desho replacing? It's replacing des. So think about, when would you say Nihongo no benkyou desu? This is Japanese studying. It might be that someone asks you, they're like, what are you doing? Or what is that? And you're like, oh, it's Japanese studying, or Japanese, I'm studying Japanese. This translated loosely. So if you want to inject uncertainty about it, maybe you're looking at someone else, or maybe someone's looking at us. They're looking at you, staring at Discord, and they're like, what's that person doing? And they look at, they can see the characters maybe, and they can say, oh, Nihongo no benkyou desho. Oh, it's probably Japanese studying. So they're looking at the action and saying, oh, it's probably this. That would be the first sentence. The second one has intention built into it, as in, I'm probably going to study Japanese. So, a small change in the sentence, but the usages between the two are quite different. Now, let's continue. Thank you for those that threw those sentences out. I appreciate it. Let's take a look at the next way we can use this. Now, with this one, you can use it for confirmation. And what is confirmation? It's ultimately a question. You're asking someone, hey, is this the case? And this, someone mentioned at the very beginning, I said, hey, what does desho remind you of? And they said ne. And that's actually very close to this one. Ne, this is kind of pigeonholing it a little bit too much, but among ne's usages, it kind of prompts for confirmation by the other person. It's like, I want you, listener, to agree with what I'm saying. Say that you agree. And here, you're kind of doing the same thing. Now, the formation is exactly the same. And interestingly, you'll note I'm kind of skipping around on the panels here, so I'm doing them out of order. But look at the end of the sentences. We've got a period on one and a question on the other. Although these are both doing the same thing, they're both asking for confirmation. These are both actually questions. They're both actually questions. And when you ask a question, you tend to ask with a rising intonation for a yes-no question. Just like we do in English. Is this good? We do the same thing in Japanese. Now, you are wondering then, well, that first sentence, so the second sentence, it's obviously a question because there's a question mark on the end of it. The first sentence, if it was spoken, you would hear something like this. このクッキーは美味しいでしょ? I'm going to say just the last word one more time. でしょ? Rising voice. And spoken, it is completely obvious that's a question. Similarly, let me read the second one. お母さんは犬が好きでしょ? Rising intonation. So, let's come back to the original question. That first sentence, if we see it written, how do we know if it's a question or not? And our favorite answer is again the answer, it's context. Remember, you don't tend to see sentences all by themselves, like a single sentence out wandering by itself in the middle of a field. The sentence is part of a conversation. And if you see it in the conversation, it will be clear as to if it's a question or not. But let's continue. You do say it with a rising intonation, でしょ? Regardless of which one you're using. And the formation is the same. There's no change in formation for all these usages. It's just statement plus でしょ. And like I said, period or question mark, it doesn't really matter. One good thing to note is, how often are you asking for confirmation about something in a written form? Probably not too often. If you were asking in a written form, you'd probably use ですか. So, it tends to come up in spoken language more. All right, you've probably already deduced the meaning of these, but let's check these out real fast. このクッキーは美味しいでしょ? Hey, nudging the person next to you. Aren't these cookies good? Don't you think these cookies are delicious? These cookies are good, right? That's a really good question. I will get to it at the end of this panel. In fact, that's a great question, which I'm going to tangent for just a minute. I hope people don't mind my tangents, but I was reading, Renshu is very anti AI. Like, we have no AI in anything in Renshu. We have no plans to do so. And because of that, I answer a lot of questions from users, questions about Renshu, questions about Japanese and whatnot. And I often, and because I was a teacher, an in-classroom teacher, and I want people to be proud of their questions, to think it was good of me to ask that question. And so I often will say, hey, that's a good question, or that's a great question. And that's what AI does. Like, that's one of those common AI catches where you see that and it makes you think it's more likely to be AI, because it's oh, that's a really good question, and that's frustrating to me that it feels like my way of praising people has been stolen by LLMs. Okay, rant aside, let's come back to this. Let me do the second sentence and I'll answer your question. The second one is closer to, Mom, you like dogs, right? お母さんは犬が好きでしょ? This could also be used. Now, お母さん, you've probably heard that you might have learned, and often in Japanese you see this written very simply, or Japanese learning rather. If you're talking about your own mother, you use haha. If you're talking about anyone else's mother, you use okasan. That's not true. You can only use haha with your own mother. But a lot of people will say okasan towards their mother, especially younger people, especially kids. It's almost like a name, like mom with a capital M. Okasan. Haha feels more like the pronoun, or like my mother, referring to your own mother, but not addressing her as like the name. Your mother's name is not mom, but you call her mom. It feels like that. Anyway, so this could also be used to refer to someone else's mother. Like, you're talking to your friend, it's like, hey, your mother, she likes dogs, right? And you could use this. Now, back to the excellent question that's in front of us. Someone's asking in the Discord, hey, how is desho different from desne? And specifically the desho, I'm guessing in this usage, this confirmation usage. This comes back to what ne fundamentally does. Ne is not really a confirmation device, I feel. Although the way it's translated and the way that a lot of people learn it is they learn it this way. They learn it as a variation of right. So let me give you a quick example. This is, especially in Japan, once it gets hotter, which is getting hotter very quickly, people love to talk about the weather. And when I say talk, I mean complain. And this is probably a worldwide thing, but it's a good icebreaker in Japanese conversations. And take a look at that first sentence. If you say this to someone else, 暑いですね, there's no doubt in that sentence that it's hot. Absolutely no doubt. You're like, it's hot, right? But you're not saying right to get confirmation. You're saying right to push the conversation along and to get them to agree with you. So you say, 暑いですね. The other person says, 超暑い. Yeah, it's crazy hot. So des ne, or ne, is typically not trying to get confirmation for what you're saying. You believe what you're saying is right or correct. The ne is prompting the listener to agree with you and to continue on that line of conversation. 暑いでしょ is closer to there still being a bit of uncertainty with what you're saying. For example, the second one might be closer to you are video chatting with your friend and you're looking at them and it looks hot. You know, they've got sweat running down their face and the short sleeves and um, it could be that they were just running and they're sweaty because of that. But it also could be they're standing there and it's so hot that it's just they're sweating from standing there. So you're trying to confirm. You're like, it's probably hot over there, but I'm asking about it. 暑いでしょ? So, going, and we have time. We have time for my little rant about ne. Um, don't translate ne. I'll die on this hill. Ne is not meant to be translated, I think. Ne has a job. Particles have jobs in Japanese, and certain particles can be translated very naturally and they fit very well inside of a sentence. For example, de, when being used to refer to a location, like where you do something, you can say at or in or on, and it fits perfectly in the English or whatever you happen to be translating it into. Some particles translate very well. Wa, for example, is almost impossible to translate. Like there's not a word that you can pin to wa and say this is the translation for wa and it will be natural in not even 50% of cases. You know, some people you might see as for da da da. You know, as for today, 今日は, as for today, I'm going shopping. But that's still not a really good fit. Firstly, because we don't usually say as for. When we talk about the as for is more of a comparison thing, where it's like as for me, relative to what someone else is doing. And there's actually another word that's more common with as for, like nara. And nara has a bunch of usages, and I can't talk about that too much today. Coming back to ne, though, ne is very similar to wa in that if it has a job inside of the sentence, but the job is not to convey information. It's to prompt a response from the other person. And so here's what you might be thinking. Isn't it? Doesn't that do the same thing? Isn't it? Or right? These are things that prompt the other person to respond. And ideally, you're aiming for a positive response to what you said. You don't want them to disagree with you. You say, you know, this movie is great, isn't it? You are expecting them and hoping them that they will say, yeah, it is great. It's awesome. However, the usage levels of ne compared to the usage levels and tone of isn't it all right are completely different. Wildly different. Ne is present in so much Japanese. Almost every level of Japanese, from formal to casual. Formal, you don't hear it quite as much, but it comes across in polite discussion all the time. It is used by every age level, every single way you can think of dividing people up into social brackets and hobbies and styles and personalities. Ne is present. It's everywhere. However, isn't it right? Absolutely is not. You wouldn't say, isn't it? When you're talking in a very polite, formal situation. Hey, CEO, this idea is really cool, right? I mean, I'm overemphasizing my voice to get the point across, but the usages between those two are not equal. It's almost like all squares are rectangles, but all rectangles are not squares. And that I wouldn't say it sets the tone of the sentence. I'd say it's more toneless, which I don't even know if that's a word, but it doesn't really establish a tone. I feel like isn't it or right does establish a much more casual, relaxed tone to the conversation. And so, isn't it is not something that you would see in a business situation, right? You wouldn't see that in business lettering. However, nay, you will see in so many places. So, what I trying to boil this down into a simple thing of all the nay usages that you see, some of those, depending on the context, depending on who's talking, can be translated into right or isn't it? And that would be perfectly okay. However, there's a huge number of nay usages that cannot be translated into isn't it or right or anything really without changing the tone of the sentence. Nay is too broad of a usage to jam it into a very fixed style of speaking represented by these negative questions, right? Isn't it? So I hope that makes sense. It's a very tricky thing to grab onto. And so I often, when I translate, I just don't translate ne. It takes an understanding of the particle to know what it's doing in there, but it doesn't, in most cases, it doesn't deserve, deserve is the wrong word. It should, it's not a living thing. It doesn't need words in the target language's translation, because that will break the idea. If you're going back and forth between the two languages, you're going to get a bad mismatch between what is appropriate. You might think to yourself, well, I shouldn't speak so casually in this situation. And so without isn't it, I don't need ne. And that's wrong. So hopefully that helps. Ne is a tricky one. So is yo. Yo is also one that I usually don't translate because it's like turning the temperature up 10% in a room. You know, it's making the sentence just a little bit stronger, a little bit more emphasis, but emphasis enough to where there's a fixed word that should always come in when yo is there? No. Okay, back on track. How many digressions have we had today? They've been great digressions. But let's jump back onto what we're doing. We have a few more examples talking about confirmation. So we're presenting information. We're saying it's not 100%, but I'm asking if you can make it 100% for me. あの人は先生でしょ? Or, let's make it a bit more casual. あの人は先生でしょ? でしょ? 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 It's fun to say. I much prefer saying でしょ compared to でしょ. And, you know, you might not be sure. Maybe that person's kind of far away and you're not quite sure, or you're having that feeling where, you know, teachers only exist inside of schools, right? So if you see them outside of a school, your brain kind of breaks down and you're like, wait, teachers are living people? They don't just fall out of the walls when class starts and then they roll back up when it's done? What's a teacher doing shopping at the convenience store? You know, it's that weird disassociation that goes on. あの人は先生でしょ? Or the last one. This one's really close to what we were talking about before. You know, this one is actually if someone's actively doing it right now, and maybe you want to jump in on that studying, and you say, hey, you're studying Japanese, right? 日本語を勉強してるでしょ? And you could use this. Now, let's jump into the last one. This is the last usage we have today. And this one is this is more of, it can be a rhetorical question, but these are actually used more as requests, kind of a request form. And again, don't forget to come back to what we were originally replacing with desho, which is des or desu ka. Often, in Japanese, when we're making a request or we're asking about something, we want to soften it, because what is a question? but in a social sense, it's a burden that you're placing on the other person because you're requiring that they do something about that question. Answer it, respond to it, do something. And so you are, in a sense, burdening them. So let's soften it up. And then, kind of in the same way, we're taking that request, that 100% request, and we're softening it just a little bit with でしょう. And so, with that in mind, we can ask for things. I was wondering if, I was thinking. It's kind of got that feel to it. And this one, you will often hear it in polite conversation, especially because in more casual conversation, you're often more direct with your requests because you're not worried as much, about upsetting the other person or burdening them because it's just your friend or your sibling or your spouse, partner, whatever. So you do hear this a lot in polite and even formal situations. So let's take a look at some examples. And the little sentence that's on the bottom, I'm skipping that. I'm skipping it until we get to the actual sentence. So let's look at these one by one. So you could say, pen o kudasai. That request is, we first learned that that's a polite way of doing it. And it is. It is polite and it does work. But now that we're leveling up our Japanese, why don't we be even more polite? Instead of assuming they have a pen and assuming they'll give it to us, why don't we say, oh, I was wondering if you have a pen, and then kind of ... with the, and then I'm going to ask for it. Pen ga aru desho. I wonder if you have a pen. Now these two, this middle one, I feel is the most common of the three. And let me jump down. So we learned earlier in a previous lesson, we had this. Let me type it out real fast. We were asking for permission. And we would say, nani nani te mo ii desu ka? Kaite mo ii desu ka? Is it okay? Is it good? Is it okay if I do something? And look, hey, there's a des in there. Why don't we take that des out and put in でしょう? トイレを借りてもいいでしょうか? So before it would be, if it was いいですか, it's like, is it okay if I, use or borrow the bathroom? This one's like, I was wondering, that wondering kind of softens it up a bit. I was wondering if I could borrow the bathroom. And トイレ is often used as you're not literally asking about the toilet specifically itself, you're asking about the room, but you still hear it used in this way. You hear them say トイレ, but you're referring to the bathroom as a whole. トイレを借りてもいいでしょうか? And again, context will kind of hint that these are questions, but especially with the でしょうか, you're not going to raise your voice. でしょうか? That doesn't happen. It's a flat. You're saying it flat. There's no rising on the end, but the request is implied by it. And this one, now this is, we're getting kind of spicy here, throwing everything in that we've learned. This we haven't talked about explicitly. We've talked about てくれる before, but we would say これを買ってくれないでしょうか? I was wondering if you wouldn't, but of course you're asking if they would, but we're using the negative to soften it even more. I was wondering if you would buy this for me. So there's a lot stacked in here. But the でしょうか will come at the end of a request. Either a request to allow you to do something or have them do something for you. But again, think of it in the sense of we're taking that certainty, that 100%, whether it's 100% about the veracity, the truth of whatever you're saying, and we're lowering it with desho, or we're saying, I think this is true, but is it? And we're asking about it, nani nani desho, or a request, like we just saw. We fully expect for them to do this for us. However, we are taking the desho to take our 100% request and bumping it down to 90 or 80%. We're still requesting. The social implication is still that they're going to do this for us. It's just that we're softening it to say, I know that this is a burden on you. I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to lessen the burden of whatever I'm about to put on you. And that's desho. Daijoubu desho. It's all right, right? So you will, now that desho is in your pocket, you're going to start to see it everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. And I think there's a separate lesson on this later on, but we will hear daro come up later. Daro is just desho's casual cousin. And so every time you see desho or daro or desho, daro, then you're going to start to think, all right, whatever's coming before that, they're just softening it up. They're not 100%. Trying to get some confirmation, and they're saying they're not sure, but they're taking information, they're just lowering it down just a little bit. And that's desho. Anyway, we're done with today's lesson. And if you ever need to check this video out, once I get it uploaded, which will be sooner than later, you cannot see this in the screen share, or rather the stream itself, but if you're in the menu for Renshu, you can probably see that just popped out. The menu that pops out, you go down to resources and Japanese lessons, and every video that we have made and we will continue to make are all available here by tapping the video icons. So you can jump onto this and check it out if you need to. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you next time. お疲れ様でした。